Hey guys, welcome to Hughes History. We're banging out the 1952 presidential election. I like Ike. Do you like Ike? I think it's the only time we have two bald dudes that are running for president. But we're going to go over the electoral map. We're going to go over the candidates. We're going to go over the campaign. And we're going to say giddy up for the learning. Let's get started right now. Let's first take a look at the electoral map. It's a 442 to 89 electoral wipeout, baby. And this is a different electoral map in terms of the political parties than we've seen before. First of all, the Democrats, they're not winning anywhere other than the solid South, and they're not even doing that very well. You could see that Eisenhower, the Republican candidate, is going to pick up Tennessee, he's going to pick up Florida, he's going to pick up Texas. So that solid South is starting to de-align from the Republican Party, and some of it's starting to go to the Republican side. And in terms of the populists that are out west and the northeastern Democrats in big cities, they're not going to win those states. You could see that Adlai Stevenson, who's the Democratic governor of Illinois and the candidate for the Democrats, isn't going to pick up anything other than those deep South states. In terms of the popular vote, we're looking at about 34 million votes for the Republican, 27 million votes for the Democrats. That's about a 55 to 44% popular vote difference, which is pretty wide in terms of presidential elections. So let's take a look at the Republican candidate, we'll take a look at the Democratic candidate, we'll look at the campaign, and we're going to do that right now. So on the Democratic side of things, we have no incumbent. Well, no incumbent that's willing to run. Harry Truman, of course, is the incumbent president. He was elected in 1948 in his own right. Remember, he was vice president for FDR in 1945 when FDR passed away. And even though the 22nd Amendment was passed in 1951, it doesn't affect Harry Truman. He's kind of grandfathered in. He is allowed to run for a third term, but he says, no, I don't want to do it. The early favorite was a reformed Tennessee senator by the name of Estes Kefauver. If I've messed his name up, I'm sorry to his family. He is a big anti-organized crime guy. He's made himself a name in the Senate. He's a Southern Democrat, which a lot of people in the Democratic Party thought that was important to go back to the Southern roots. But Harry Truman is going to convince his friend, the reformed governor of Illinois, a Democrat by the name of Adlai Stevenson. Adlai Stevenson comes from a very prominent political family. His grandfather was the vice president for Grover Cleveland, another Democrat, and it takes some prodding. Adlai Stevenson is an intellectual. He ponders everything, and it's going to be one of his downfalls in the election. But eventually, he decides he's going to go for the nomination. And on the third ballot, the Democrats nominate Adlai Stevenson to be the standard bearer of the new Democratic Party, carrying on the tradition of the New Deal and Harry Truman's foreign policy, which we'll talk about in a little while. Let's take a look at who he's going to face on the Republican side, who was somebody the Democrats tried to get, but they didn't. So the Republicans are going to end up on the first ballot choosing Dwight Eisenhower from New York. He was president of Colombia. Of course, he's a famous general now, and he's got a lot to say about the United States foreign policy in Korea. And it took some prodding. The Democrats wanted him. The Republicans eventually convinced him. Henry Cabot Lodge, the famous senator from Massachusetts and the standard bearer of the Eastern establishment of the Republican Party, Thomas Dewey, convinced Ike that this is the time to run. And he did face opposition. There is a conservative element in the Republican Party, and that is represented by, again, Robert Taft, son of William Howard Taft, who's going to go for the nomination again. He is an Ohioan. He is a conservative. He's more of an isolationist, a non-interventionalist, and he's somebody on the conservative side of things that wants to wipe out the New Deal, where the Eastern establishment is more comfortable with maintaining the New Deal, reining in some spending, but really having a more internationalist foreign policy, and certainly, kind of going against the Soviets in Europe and in Asia, which Harry Truman is trying to do. So it's a first balloter. The Republicans from 1952 till today have always won on the first ballot, and that's going to be, like I said, Dwight Eisenhower. So now we have our candidates. We have a military general, a Republican, Dwight Eisenhower, going up against, some would say, an intellectual egghead, Adlai Stevenson. So let's take a look at the race. So context is really important. You have to kind of remember that this is kind of the height of McCarthyism, kind of this fear of communism within the United States, and there's a lot of charges that there's communists that are working in the State Department. And you have to remember in 1950, 1951, the United States gets embroiled in Korea, and in 1952, it's not going very well. So there's a lot of complaining that we weren't ready for Korea and that we have communist infiltration into the White House, into the State Department, and this is affecting our policies. I think that that's probably the biggest problem from Adlai Stevenson, is that he's walking in trying to protect the administration of Harry Truman, who has a 66% disapproval rating. It's going to be very, very difficult to do. And I think Adlai Stevenson's other problem is he isn't intellectual. A lot of people claim that he talked above the masses, that he's really smart, he's really, wonky and policy oriented, but he wasn't able to be folksy and to talk to people at their level to make them understand why they should vote Democratic. And you can see from that electoral map again, he doesn't do a very good job of it, especially in those northeastern Democratic, urban centers and those populist, Midwesterners and certainly California, which has voted Democratic before. Who does Adlai Stevenson choose for his vice president? It's none other than John Sparkman, an avid segregationalist senator from Alabama, showing you that the Democrats are very, very split on civil rights, and they're trying to reach out not only to that solid South, that Democratic traditional base, but also, with Adlai Stevenson being a liberal, reach out to those northern liberals that are living in cities. On the other hand, we have a campaign that's run very slickly by Dwight Eisenhower. Dwight Eisenhower had an I like Ike concept going into this election. The Eisenhower campaign organized something called Citizens for Eisenhower to circumvent the Republican Party apparatus that some thought was being controlled by the Taft conservative element of things. And this was more of kind of a neighborly kind of way to have outreach on a local level. And he had a huge outreach to women. Women voted overwhelmingly for Eisenhower, who was seen as not only the person that was best fit to fight the war in Korea, but somebody that could be trusted, somebody that wasn't corrupted, and somebody that was like you. I like Ike. And you could see from some of these ads, they are very direct, very cartoony, and very 1950s.
For president, Ike, for president, Ike, for president. You like Ike, I like Ike, everybody likes Ike. For president, hang out the banners, beat the drum, we'll take Ike to Washington.
We do have one bump in the road for Dwight Eisenhower, and that is his choice for the vice presidential nominee, who is Richard Milhous Nixon, a freshman senator from California, a House member formerly, who's a huge Red Scare, McCarthyite kind of guy. And there were a lot of people that were a little bit upset with Dwight Eisenhower for cozying up to that element of the Republican Party. Harry Truman was very upset when Eisenhower went to Wisconsin to give a speech that was critical of McCarthy. He ended up not giving the speech, and he ended up giving a photo opportunity to Senator McCarthy, which you could see right here, kind of cozying up to that element of the McCarthyites in the Republican Party. And that one bump in the road with Richard Nixon is Richard Nixon is being accused of accepting $18,000 in illegal campaign contributions from wealthy donors. And Richard Nixon pulls a humongous victory using the media, giving a very famous speech called the Checkers speech, because one of those gifts was a dog that he gave to his daughter. Watch it.
One other thing I probably should tell you, because if I don't, they'll probably be saying this about me too. We did get something, a gift. You know what it was? It was a little Cocker Spaniel dog in a crate that he'd sent all the way from Texas. And the kids, like all kids, love the dog. And I just want to say this right now, that regardless of what they say about it, we're going to keep it.
And with the Republican Party behind Richard Nixon, Eisenhower, who wasn't a huge Nixon lover, decides we'll keep the status quo with Nixon. Let's go with Nixon, and it's going to work. Nixon was a great campaigner. He's young. He's electric. He's, getting that Western vote for Eisenhower. But at the end of the day, this is a wipeout, guys. The Democratic Party has now faltered. They've lost their first election since 1928, and the Republicans are going to have a couple terms of Eisenhower. So giddy up for the learning, guys. We hope that you learn something about the 1952 election. If you haven't subscribed to Hughes History, you can do that right now by clicking that big red button right there. And certainly if you want to visit the election playlist, we've done a whole bunch of them, not necessarily in order. You can check those out by clicking that button right there and zip through the lands of the internet so you can grow your brain 10 times its size. Thanks for listening, as always, guys, and I always say it, where attention goes, energy flows, and we'll see you guys next time that you press the buttons.